He maintained his faith because it was a matter of will.
He'd come to believe that he was a Messiah blessed by providence. He just believed that there was something of the divine about him.
This Jewish soldier became the face of Nazi propaganda, hailed as the ideal German soldier. Another fought bravely on the Eastern Front, even as his own family was being murdered in Auschwitz, and both believed they were fighting for Germany, not for Hitler. During World War II, thousands of Jews and part Jews served inside Hitler's military. But was it survival, patriotism, or something even more complicated? How did Jews end up fighting for Nazi Germany? The truth is darker and more complex than most history books reveal. When Adolf Hitler rose to power in 1933, many German Jews still believed they could survive inside the new Germany. Even though Hitler had shouted anti-Semitic threats in Mein Kampf and at rallies, many dismissed it as political talk, meant to stir up the angry crowds. Some believed Germany's long tradition of Jewish integration, serving in the military, contributing to culture, and being loyal citizens would protect them. They were wrong. Almost overnight, anti-Semitism became law. Jewish-owned shops were boycotted. Jewish teachers, lawyers, and civil servants lost their jobs. Universities purged Jewish professors. Books by Jewish authors were ripped from libraries and burned in public squares. The hatred moved faster than anyone expected. But Nazi racial policy wasn't simple. German society was too deeply mixed. For generations, Jews and Christians had married, built families, and lived side by side. By the 1930s, most German Jews were fully assimilated. Many had converted to Christianity, spoke German, dressed like their neighbors, and thought of themselves as German first. Some traced their family roots back hundreds of years. Many were decorated veterans of World War I, proud of their service to the fatherland, believing it had earned them a permanent place in German life. But Hitler's Germany wasn't built on shared history. It was built on blood. Suddenly, religion didn't matter. Loyalty didn't matter. Even service in World War I didn't matter. What mattered was ancestry. In 1935, the Nazis pressed the Nuremberg Laws, a brutal set of rules that defined who was and wasn't a Jew. Anyone with 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents was labeled a full Jew. Those with 1 or 2 Jewish grandparents were branded Mischlinge, mixed bloods. It didn't matter if their families had converted to Christianity generations ago. In Hitler's world, blood was destiny. Being labeled a Mischling came with serious consequences. Half-Jews couldn't marry Aryans without special government permission. They were banned from top universities, blocked from civil service jobs, and pushed to the edges of society. Even quarter Jews faced restrictions, like needing a special certificate to prove they were Aryan enough for certain jobs. A hidden Jewish grandparent could destroy a career, or worse. Still, at the start of the war, the rules bent when Hitler needed soldiers. Thousands of half-Jews and quarter Jews found themselves in uniform. Some joined out of loyalty to Germany. Some thought serving might protect their families, and many had no real choice at all. The army needed bodies, and for a while, pragmatism beat out racial ideology. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, thousands of Mischlinge marched into battle wearing the Nazi uniform. Among them was Werner Goldberg, a young soldier who, for a brief moment, became the poster boy of Hitler's army. His photograph, proud and polished, was splashed across Nazi newspapers under the headline "The Ideal German Soldier." What the public didn't know was that Goldberg's father was Jewish. By Nazi law, he was a half-Jew, and once his background came to light, he was expelled from the army. His image, however, stayed in circulation for months, an uncomfortable reminder of how even Nazi propaganda couldn't outrun reality. For Hans-Georg Fellenberg, the story was just as painful. Fellenberg had grown up believing he was as German as anyone else. He joined the Wehrmacht without hesitation. Fighting in France while back home, his Jewish grandmother was taken away. The letters from his family stopped coming. No explanations, no goodbyes, only silence. After the war, Falkenberg would learn the truth about what had happened. But during those years, staying in the army felt like the only option. Running wasn't survival, it was a death sentence. For soldiers with Jewish ancestry, fear never went away. It followed them into every medical inspection, every question about their past. Circumcision could be a giveaway. Some tried to explain it with invented illnesses. Some practiced small tricks to fool doctors during exams. Helmut Kopp was one of them. His mother was Jewish, but when he signed for service, he marked himself as full Aryan. Kopp later said he wasn't fighting for the Reich or any grand idea. He was fighting for himself to make it through another day. But secrets never stayed buried for long. Rolf von Sydow, a quarter Jew, joined the Panzer Corps by keeping quiet about his ancestry. He earned respect on the battlefield, building a solid reputation. But once his commanding officer discovered the truth, everything changed. Von Sydow was stripped of his rank, thrown in jail for 3 weeks, and demoted. Even after all that, he returned to the front, determined to prove that courage had nothing to do with blood. In some cases, survival meant facing unbearable choices. Nashemia Warman, a Polish Jew, escaped a labor camp only to stumble into Nazi battalion. With no other way out, he posed as a German cook and blended into the unit. For the rest of the war, he wore the uniform of the enemy, serving meals to the soldiers, hunting down his own people. Years later, Warman summed it up with bitter clarity. The best hiding place was in the mouth of the wolf. Jewish soldiers inside the Wehrmacht sometimes found themselves standing face to face with the worst horrors of the Nazi regime. On the Eastern Front, in places like Latvia and Belarus, they witnessed mass shootings of Jewish civilians carried out by Einsatzgruppen. Some tried to fight back quietly. They smuggled food to prisoners, forged documents, or manipulated orders to buy time. One Orthodox Jewish officer later remembered secretly issuing passes that helped Jews escape execution in the Baltic states. Years later, when he met another Jewish veteran who had stayed in the army, they both agreed. Staying had allowed them to save more lives than they ever could have by fleeing. Higher up in the military, the contradictions grew even more unsettling. Field Marshal Erhard Milch, whose father was Jewish, rose to become the second most powerful man in the Luftwaffe, right behind Hermann Göring. To protect Milch, Göring arranged for his mother to sign a document claiming Erhard was the child of her Aryan uncle. Hitler himself approved it, granting Milch full German blood status. Milch repaid that favor by embracing the regime completely. He oversaw forced labor projects and gave the green light for human experiments at Dachau. After the war, he was tried at Nuremberg and sentenced to life in prison. In the end, he served only 7 years before being released. Another figure who benefited from Hitler's personal intervention was Helmuth Wilberg. A brilliant Luftwaffe strategist, Wilberg's work helped shape Germany's early victories in Poland and France. His Jewish ancestry should have ended his career before it began, but Hitler made an exception. Like many Mischlinge, Wilberg insisted he fought for Germany, not for the Nazi Party. It was a distinction many clung to even when history made such lines impossible to defend. Others weren't so lucky. Ernst Bloch, a decorated colonel with Jewish ancestry, stayed loyal through years of service. He had even helped rescue Jewish lives early in the war through connections with the German intelligence service. But loyalty didn't save him. In 1944, Himmler personally ordered his dismissal. Bloch, who had risked everything for the fatherland, was thrown out because of blood he couldn't change. On the front lines, the personal costs were often unbearable. Heinz Z, a half-Jew who survived brutal fighting in Russia, returned home hoping for a fresh start. Instead, he found out that his first wife and their infant son had been sent to Auschwitz. They had already been murdered by the time he learned they were even in danger. Heinz lived with that grief for the rest of his life, too broken to even tell his second wife about the family he had lost. When the war finally ended, survival came with a heavy price. Some former soldiers tried to reconnect with the Jewish identity they had hidden. Others walked away from it completely, feeling too torn between two worlds to belong to either. Karl-Heinz Mayer, a former Wehrmacht soldier with Jewish ancestry, moved to Israel and fought for his independence. But because Jewish identity under Israeli law passes through the mother, Mayer wasn't recognized as Jewish. He'd fought for the new Jewish state, but he could never truly be part of it. For many, rejection came from all sides. Some faced scorn from surviving relatives who could not forgive them for wearing a Nazi uniform. No matter the reason, some were told it would have been better if they had died in the camps. The hurt from those words stayed with them long after the guns fell silent. At the very edges of this story, the choices became even harder to understand. Karl-Heinz Levy, a full Jew from Munich, managed to forge Aryan papers and enlist in the Waffen-SS, the most brutal part of Hitler's military. Looking back, Levy admitted that if his fellow soldiers had ever found out who he really was, they would have killed him without hesitation. He survived the war, but carried the heavy burden of knowing he had hidden among men who would have murdered him if they knew the truth. Inside the ghettos, survival brought its own set of moral nightmares. Some Jews were forced into working as ghetto police, informers, or members of the Judenrat councils that the Nazis set up to control Jewish communities. A few tried to use their positions to help others. Some abused the small power they were given. After the war, Israel passed a law to prosecute Jewish collaborators. Trials were held, some were convicted. Others lived quietly, burdened by guilt that never fully went away. But the larger truth is clear. Most Jews in Mischlinge who found themselves serving the Nazi regime weren't collaborators by choice. Historians like Brian Mark Rigg and Yehuda Bauer have shown that genuine ideological support for Hitler among Jews was extremely rare. Most were trapped, fighting for survival in a world that gave them no good options. Their stories are messy, painful, and hard to face, but they force us to remember something important. Under tyranny, people often had to make choices no one should ever have to make. It's easy to judge those choices from the safety of a distance. It's much harder to truly understand them. So in the end, the Jews who fought for Hitler were more than just soldiers. They were a reminder that even survival can come with unbearable cost. If you're interested in more fascinating history content, make sure to click on the next video.